Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made for Mixed Media Mayhem. This week we are scrap lifting a gorgeous layout that was created by Rebecca Moore of Precious Pages Papercraft, and she is truly one of my favorite scrapbookers. If you haven't already checked out her Instagram and YouTube channel, I would highly recommend it. She is a scrapbooker that has such a strong sense of composition, and I absolutely love when I get a chance to scrap lift her. So I will link her YouTube video that she made for this layout that we are scrap lifting in the description box if you would like to check it out. When I watched Rebecca's process video for this layout, I was surprised to see that she used a brayer. I sometimes use brayers on my layout, but it's usually with acrylic paint and not with sprays. So I started out trying what Rebecca did. I used some Prima Color Bloom 2 sprays. I used sugar plum and pink crocus on this layout. I believe I started with the pink crocus, which is a pinkish lavender kind of color. And then I realized that I had some brown from another project that kind of mixed in with that color. And I liked the way that looked because of my subject matter. But then I was thinking that I wanted the color to be a little bit less transparent. So I decided to go ahead and add some acrylic paint to the background. So I added some US Art Supply Wild Purple. I added some water and then I rolled it out with the brayer. I wanted to make the same basic shape that Rebecca had in her layout. Next, I used a Tim Holtz mesh stencil. This is the same stencil that Rebecca used, I believe. And I used some Heidi Swapp metallic texture paste in black. And I put it through the stencil. And then I also turned the stencil around and began doing a little bit of stamping with the stencil, just so that I would have some areas that were a little bit darker and some areas that were a little bit lighter. Now I'm going back in with the Color Bloom 2 sprays by Prima. I'm adding some splatters to this area of color. I have to be honest, I wasn't sure if I liked the way the background was coming at this point, but I decided that I was going to just keep going and see what happened. So I splattered the Prima spray, I believe that was the sugar plum, and then I also added some watered down white acrylic paint splatters. After I added the white splatters and allowed them to dry, because the acrylic paint takes a little bit longer to dry than some of the other materials I use on this page, I went ahead and added some of the color to the border. I again used the brayer. I got this brayer on Amazon. It measures 2 inches. I don't really have a lot of brayers, so I don't know how to compare this to others, but it works just fine. I like the idea of switching up the method that I use to apply color to the page. I usually use the packaging technique. Just like the packaging technique, the brayer allows for color to be applied in a way that looks a little bit random and not too controlled, and I like that for scrapbooking layouts. After I used the iridescent paint around the outside, I added some splatters. I used the paint that was on my table, added a little bit of water, and then I used a small paintbrush and I splattered it around. I just wanted some small splatters, so I used a small paintbrush. These splatters turned out to be extremely small. I added a lot of them, and I really don't worry about adding a lot of splatters if they are very light, because if I think there are too many of them, I can always go back in with some gesso and clean them up a little bit. And this is a piece of 120 pound, which is a thick white cardstock to which I've added gesso, so that also allows me to clean it up a little bit using a wet paper towel. The photo that I'm using today was taken in a museum in Salem, Massachusetts. It's called the Peabody Museum. We went to Salem to celebrate Halloween. This was from a couple of years back. The photo that we took is not Halloween related, but I decided when I made the album that since it was a Halloween themed trip, that I was going to have all of the layouts in the album have some kind of connection to Halloween. So you can see here that I'm using purple, which I actually think looks nice with the yellow tones in the picture, but I definitely chose it because purple is a perfect Halloween color. So I used a stencil from Echo Park. It's called Spider Cobwebs. I used a dauber and some distress oxides. I first used seedless preserves, that's the purple color, and then I was thinking that the layout would look so much more vibrant if I added another color. One of my favorite colors to add to Halloween layouts is a turquoisey teal color. I don't think Distress Oxide has a true teal just yet anyway. So I used peacock feathers, which is a little bit more of a turquoise than a teal, but I thought that it served the purpose of kind of brightening up the whole layout and just making it look more interesting. I don't mind making monochromatic layouts, but I do think that combinations of color is what makes working with color so exciting for me. So I added the peacock feathers using that same stencil, and then I started doing some stamping on the layout. I started off with a mesh stamp. I'm using some jet black Staz On ink. I have two different mesh stamps. One is Tim Holtz, one is Studio Calico, and at this point I have mixed them up. I don't know which is which, but they both look similar on the layouts, and I really like the look of having a little bit of the mesh. And then I started using a Tim Holtz dot stamp, and this was from a larger set that had a lot of mushrooms, but my favorite stamp, and the reason that I bought that stamp set, is this gorgeous dot stamp. It just seems to add a nice touch to every layout that I use it on. Now I'm using a stamp that's called Stampendous Crumbled Borders stamp, and I'm adding that in just a couple of places along the edge of the layout. This is the first time I'm using this stamp. It's a strip of lines. Something I really miss is buying scrapbooking and stamping supplies in person. I wasn't sure what the stamp was going to look like, but I thought it would make a nice border, and I'm very happy with it. There are some things that I buy and then I receive them in the mail and they're a different scale than I thought they would be, maybe a little smaller or a little larger, or they're just different in some way. This turned out to be a good purchase. I think I'll get a lot of use out of it. I wanted to add some blue splatters to the layout, so I just applied some of the peacock feathers Distress Oxide to my table, which has a glass top. I added some water, and then I used a small paintbrush. I sprinkled those around the layout, and now I'm going in again with another round of the Prima Color Bloom 2 in Sugar Plum, and just adding some more splatters to the large area of color and then all around the edge as well. I could not resist adding yet another round of watered down white acrylic paint splatters. I just love the white splatters. It doesn't seem to matter what I'm doing with mixed media. I always like to add some white splatters. This time I'm not only putting them on the color that's in the middle of the layout, but also going all around that outside border and adding some splatters there as well. If you watch Rebecca's video, you'll see that I followed her process very closely. I love following another scrapbooker's mixed media process because usually different people think differently about how to create a background, and I always learn so much when I follow someone else's process from beginning to end. I added a little bit of Liquitex gesso to my table. I had gotten a little smudge of black ink on the bottom right from the beginning, and then I figured while I was covering that up, I could use the gesso and cover up a few areas where there were just a few too many splatters. I should mention that initially I was using Finnabair heavy gesso on the background, but then I remembered that that gesso is a little more yellow than the Liquitex that I already have on the background, so I decided to switch to the Liquitex gesso. Then I used a small circle stamp that I had in my stash, and I added circles in a couple of places just to add some stamping that was a little bit of a different scale than everything else that I've put down so far. Like the original, I wanted to add 3 tags to my layout. I used a die that I had in my stash to cut out the tags. I used a We Are Memory Keepers punch to punch out the circle that goes on the top around the hole that's punched in the top of the tag. I distressed the edges of all the tags with my scissors to give them a roughed up look. And then I used some Distress Oxide in black soot to ink the edges of all of the tags. The paper that I used to create these tags is a Tim Holtz pattern paper called Abandoned. They were selling it in Michael's quite a while back when Tim Holtz still made paper pads, and I absolutely love this collection. It's perfect for a number of different subjects that I like to scrapbook, but especially Halloween. So I cut out a turquoise tag, an orange tag, and a purple tag. And then I use this purplish blue piece of paper to mount my photo on. I did just a little bit of distressing to the mat by folding it up in a couple of places. I used ATG adhesive to attach the photo down to the layout and check to make sure that the photo was straight with my T-square ruler. I'm going to use some black twine on each of the 3 tags. I'm going to tie the twine in a bow. I'm placing the tags in the exact same places that Rebecca put them on her layout. I really liked the balance of the way she had those 3 tags arranged. Once I had the tags positioned, I used a little bit of my ATG adhesive and I attached all 3 of them down to the page. And then I started adding some other embellishments to the page. I had some hinges in my stash and I wanted to use those on the layout because you can't tell from the photo, but this entire sculpture of a man's head was made up of hinges. It's hard to believe unless you look at it very closely, but it was extremely cool. I don't know if I'll ever find another layout for which hinges are so appropriate, so I thought I would attach those down around the outside of the photo. And then, as I said, I wanted to add a hint of Halloween, so I'm using these glittery Sticko bats, and I place them in 3 different places on the layout. So I decided to call this layout Unhinged, due to the hinges. Using a Sizzix die, I cut out the word unhinged 4 times. I cut it out 3 times using some 80-pound white cardstock, and then the 4th time I used that Tim Holtz pattern paper. I used an orange print that had a few touches of green in it. I chose that orange paper because I thought that the colors in that paper were very close to the colors in the photo. I took the 3 layers of the white cardstock letters, I layered them on top of each other, and then I glued the pattern paper letter on the very top. Before I made these letters, I looked through my stash to see if I had any thickers or other letter stickers that I could use on this layout, but none of the letter stickers looked just right with the pattern paper that I used, so I figured it would be best to just use the pattern paper to make the letters. It does take a little bit of time to cut out all the letters and some time to layer them on top of each other, but I think it was really worth it for this particular layout. I also used some Distress Oxide in black soot and I inked the edges of all of the letters. I inked the edges mainly because I think that it helps the letters be more visible on the backgrounds, but on this particular layout, I also think that that black made the letters blend in with the rest of the layout since so many other things have been inked with the black soot. I use some glossy accents, which can be used to make things shiny, but it's also a great adhesive for things like this, for jewels, for sequins. So I use that to anchor these hinges to the layout. And then I also included some keys, which aren't directly related to hinges, but I used to work in a company. It was called S. Parker Hardware, and they made a lot of door hardware, hinges and doorknobs and keys. So in my mind, all of these things kind of go together. I used my T-square and I glued the title down to the page using some gel glue. I had put some bats on the layout earlier, but now I'm kind of moving them around and switching them up a little bit. I have 2 on the top right-hand side of the layout. I have 1 to the left of the large photo cluster, and then I put 1 underneath the title that says Unhinged. I temporarily put a little tiny bat on the left-hand side of the photo cluster, but I decided that was way too small, so I will switch that out in a little while. Then I used some of the Tim Holtz pattern paper and an EK Success photo corner punch, and I punched out some photo corners for the layout. I usually like to put pearls or some little jewel on the photo corners, but on this particular layout I decided to ink the edges and then leave them plain other than that. I use ATG adhesive to attach the photo corners down to the photo. I don't like to use wet glue, if at all possible, on the photo, just because I know that I can be a little messy sometimes and I don't want to make a mess of my photo. Now this is where I switched that little tiny bat out for a larger bat. I think it was the same one I had there before, That was the last touch that I added to the layout, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video, everybody. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I want to say thank you so much to Rebecca Moore for making such a gorgeous layout, and I really enjoyed scrap lifting it. I had a lot of fun with this layout. Please take a look in the description box. You'll find links to the videos of all the other scrapbookers who are creating videos this week for Mixed Media Mayhem. I hope that you have a fantastic day, everybody, and I will be back again soon with another video. Take care. Bye-bye.